apologize. I've got a bit of a dry throat this morning, so not sick at all, but just every now and then I might have to take a pause here. I got gum, I got cough drop, I got everything kind of going on, so hopefully keep it going. So, one of the things growing up, my parents always loved, and they still do it today, is going to the movies. And it's actually kind of fun because at my parents' house, my mom has this mirror that she has lined with ticket stubs. And it keeps growing. It's like a wreath. And it's kind of fun because I'll go and I'll look at them, and whenever I go home, and I'm like, I didn't even know that was a movie. I had no idea. I've never heard of that one. Never heard of that one. So it's kind of fun. The only problem with the fact that my parents loved going to the movies is that my mom tends to always be running 5 to 10 minutes late for everything. My high school friends deemed it Engel standard time. All right, and they would just understand that it was about going to be 5 to 10 minutes later than. So I didn't know that there were previews to movies, and I actually didn't know that usually there was an opening scene. So what's the problem? If you get there late and you miss the opening scene, what's the problem with that?
How disappointing you?
Yeah, you might miss, an important piece of information, right? And sort of your opening, setting up the story. Anything else? Why the opening scene is important? Introduction, yeah. Hook, right? Kind of draws you in. And often the opening scene, and for a movie, a play, a book, it sets the tone for the rest of the story, right? How many of us have seen Saving Private Ryan with the opening landing at D-Day? If you miss that, how would you get the rest of the story? It sets the stage. And how many of us have seen the iconic beginning of Star Wars franchise? And the smoke, and all you hear is... it's amazing, right? It draws you right in. And if you're into the whole heartstrings thing, how many people saw the movie Up? And it lays out the whole story of Carl and Ellie's love story. And if you aren't crying 5 minutes into that movie, you aren't human. Opening scenes are important. And they tell us crucial information. They set up themes, and they tell us about key characters. Today, we get the first detailed scene of Jesus' public ministry in Mark's Gospel. And we remember that Mark is by far the shortest of all the Gospels, right? We think that Mark was meant to be read aloud in one sitting in an assembly like this, like a storytelling. And we think it would take the entire book would take about an hour and a half to read. Since it's so short, this means that most of the stories are very brief and with few details. So when we get details, we should probably pay attention. So here's your quiz this morning. Open up your gospel lesson. What do you notice about the details of the opening scenes of Jesus' public ministry?
Unclean spirit.
There's an unclean spirit. Very, very important. Yeah, it doesn't just say a spirit or an evil spirit or anything like that. It says an unclean spirit. Definitely important.
Speaks with authority.
Speaks with authority. That's continually emphasized. The scribes, generally, when they taught from tradition. And it sounds like Jesus might have taught tradition plus. What else do you notice? Yeah, the unclean spirit knows who Jesus is. And it's interesting, I don't, yeah. And so with that, the unclean spirit almost seems a little afraid, which is interesting. Anything else? I'm not looking for anything specific. The key to reading Scripture is noticing details and asking, why is that there? Yeah.
I think he's really trying to drive home the fact that Jesus is talking with authority as opposed to just teaching. That there's something more there.
Yeah, I think we've been in those spaces where, because right now, we're reading this, we don't hear, the sounds, and what would have Jesus' voice sounded like? What does, think back to when you have heard somebody speak with authority. What does that voice sound like? Could be. Strong. Confident. So all of those things, notice these when you are reading Scripture. Notice these things. And if you are uncertain about them, a really good thing, a really fun thing to do is to email or text your pastor and ask them, hey, I noticed this. That will make my day. So please. And I'm gonna keep going because I do have a 5-minute longer cutoff today from Jason, so I gotta keep us going. Is the one specific detail that I want to focus in on Jesus' opening teaching and miracle, and it might be crucial for the rest of Mark's story about Jesus' life, mission, and ministry. And Bruce brought it up. What kind of spirit is this man afflicted by? Unclean. Again, this is the shortest book with the briefest descriptions, and yet this unclean spirit is named 3 times. Could this be important? Capernaum was one of the first places that we visited on our tour of Jesus' life in the Holy Land. And there are all these ruins, and in Sunday school this morning, you saw some of the average houses. And there's these little houses and shops that are little square buildings with little rooms all around. Town of about 1,500 people. And at the center of town, there's a much larger building. And this was the synagogue. The synagogue is much more finely finished. We were looking at the pictures, and the synagogue, main room, is probably bigger than this church. So again, this is a large structure. And it's got a second floor, and it also has a youth room off to the side, which I thought was interesting. So the synagogue was not only the center of religious life in the village, but it was also the center of social life. It was where people went and worshiped. It was where people received schooling. It was where people hung out, sometimes, met their wives, that kind of stuff. So again, what kind of spirit was this man afflicted by? Bruce? Unclean. Much has been made by scholars and professors about what exactly an unclean spirit is. Some believe that the man had a mental illness that was perceived as an unclean spirit. Others think the man might have had some sort of visible skin disease or disorder. Others wonder if it was a speech impediment or a disability of some sort. And I'm not sure it matters. The bottom line is that this guy was different from everybody else. And what do we do with people who are different from us? Shun them, right? We've known this since the beginning of time, right? On the playground, what happens when there's a kid that's different? Get left out. What do we do when there's that weird person at work? We leave them out. What do we do at school? We leave them out. We exclude, we marginalize, we isolate. We keep the unclean away from us, out of fear and ignorance that somehow it will infect us, or taint us, or hurt the rest of the group. This guy who shows up while Jesus is teaching shouldn't be there. He shouldn't be at the synagogue. He is shunned. He's cut off from his community. This is the way you deal with unclean spirits. You isolate them, but not Jesus. In his opening scene, his opening miracle, in setting the tone for the rest of his whole ministry, Jesus engages the man who has the unclean spirit. And even the unclean spirit seems surprised, right? You can see what he says. "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" To me, it sounds like the unclean spirit is used to being left alone and avoided. The accepted treatment was to cut this guy off from the religious and social community, and basically the afflicted would be left to suffer alone because the community feared coming into contact with him. The community was afraid of what was unfamiliar, unexplainable, and uncomfortable. Do our churches still do this today? How many of us have ever been made to feel unwelcome or unwanted from a religious group or a social group? Perhaps it was your skin color. Perhaps it was your gender. Maybe it was your marriage or your relationship status. Or maybe even for the clothes that you wore. Far too often, our churches proclaim, "All are welcome here." Really? What happens when we come face to face with someone who is different than ourselves? Someone who makes us uncomfortable? The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we really mean all when we say all? In the opening act of Jesus' story, God answers that question with a resounding yes. The afflicted man is not cast away from the community, but drawn in. He is brought back into his church and into his social fabric of his life. Instead of being told to get better on his own, to get clean and sober first, to get right with God and then come back and join us, the man is invited in, then the healing begins. And St. Peter's Lutheran is trying to live into this example. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. There is no dress code here. You wear a three-piece suit, you wear shorts, you get communion, right? We serve God's grace and forgiveness to all. We've hosted education classes about the disease of addiction. So those that are in the throes of addiction or in the process of recovery aren't thought of as weak-willed or morally flawed, but as somebody with a medical illness that needs help and mercy. What's more is you've hired a pastor who has a diagnosed mental illness and who takes 3 pills a day to help battle depression and anxiety. Perhaps those with mental illness don't lack willpower or faith, but rather have a medical illness and need the support of their faith community. People of God, you don't have the miraculous power to call out unclean spirits. You don't have the ability to heal diseases or multiply food like Jesus did. And yet we can all break down the walls of fear and shame that isolate and condemn so many in our society. This week, this very week, you have the power, you have the authority to treat those around you at school, at work, in our communities with compassion and kindness. Here's what it looks like. Smile. Make eye contact. Learn their name. Listen to their story. Because we all are deeply loved by God and truly children of our Father. Thanks be to God and amen.